As we came into this year, everybody was mentioning this 50 years since your first championship. And I sit there and I think about that, and really 50 years seems like yesterday. I can recall just about everything that happened during that time frame. The first race was in VIR, and I had just gotten a weekend pass. I was rotating out of the Army after coming back from Vietnam. And the CO was a big racing fan, so he went to that race. He didn't know I was, he didn't know me from Adam. And in the base paper the next morning, it said, Hurley Haywood is, at rotating out of the Army, and I go, oh my God, somebody's going to read this. And sure enough, that afternoon I got a summons to the commander's office, and he said, we got to accelerate your departure from the Army so you can continue on, because it was really a good race. I came down to college here in 1967, and Peter and I met each other at an autocross, which I beat him at. I was not old enough to get my racing license yet, but he said, don't worry, we're gonna go to the Watkins Glen 6 hours in 1969. And I said, how am I gonna do that? I don't even have a regional license, which is your basic license. He said, don't worry about it. We'll get it through NASCAR. Once you get your NASCAR license, which was $25 in the mail, you could go then to the FIA, which was a governing body, and they would issue you a license. So I went to Watkins Glen with maybe 3 races under my belt. And the SCCA people there were completely freaked out. They go, what's going on here? This kid is, who is this kid? And Peter said, don't worry about it. He's fine. He'll be perfectly okay. And we won the race. So it was one of those things that just, when you think back, how lucky was I to get that opportunity with Peter to begin with. The association with Brumos. The first championship year was 71, and we were given a 914 to race. Actually, there's 914 behind me, and when you compare the 914.6 to a 911, because the motor is basically moved almost to the middle, so it's a mid-engine car, and it was very nimble, very easy to drive, had great durability, you really could get the brakes on. And so we were kind of out in left field when we would qualify, but by the midpoint of the race, we were right on top of those guys, and we just ran them into the ground. And that was the reason why we were successful in that first year, racing against equipment that was much faster than ours. But we won the race because of durability and planning. Peter was a great planner. He'd like to have every scenario covered, and we would have a plan for anything that could happen. It was my first year of racing for a championship in 71, and so that was kind of the learning process for me. I was learning, had an open book. Every time we went onto a racetrack, it was a learning experience. And now 50 years later, the book of knowledge is huge. A lot of people say, what's the most important thing that you can do as a racing driver? What are some of the things that you learn that are important to your success? There's 2 things. One, the most important thing that a driver can do is vision. Your eyes tell your hands and feet what to do. And if you're not looking at the proper thing, you can't instruct your feet and your hands to make the right kind of adjustments. So vision is extremely important, and patience is extremely important. You don't want to push yourself. It's like a chess game, and racing is like chess. And every move that you make is a calculated move to a risk-reward benefit. So you don't want to risk something that doesn't have a very, very good outcome. And when after many years of racing, you kind of learn how to evaluate a condition or a scenario and make the proper adjustments to make the move or the pass successful. I think one of the things that we had to worry about when I first started racing was racing was dangerous. It was very dangerous. The cars were constructed with speed and not necessarily safety as the forefront. Today, because of the development of car building technologies, driver suit technology, helmet technology, all the paraphernalia that we wear, the Hans device to keep your head, located where you're not gonna break your neck. And so those were things that we constantly thought about as we were driving, and they tempered our enthusiasm to make a really stupid move. Nowadays, the cars are so strong, the safety equipment is so technically advanced that today's drivers don't really have to worry about getting hurt. Up until really kind of the early 2000s, all of the things in the cars were managed by the drivers. So we didn't have ABS brakes, we didn't have power steering, we didn't have sequential gear shifting, we didn't have air conditioning in the cockpit, we didn't have anything. And we ourselves, our drivers, had to manage all those things. So my foot was my traction control. My foot was my ABS brakes. My hands were my shifter. They weren't sequential, they were a regular, gearbox. And that allowed us to be superior to the other guys on the track. When the drivers that were able to master those conditions were the ones that are going to be the most successful. Now we've got all those things that are managed electronically, and that just forces everybody into a much tighter bracket. The reason I was able to start into racing was I was a business administration major in college, and I drew up a really slick proposal to my father. And he was so impressed with the professionalism of this proposal that he agreed to help me support it for 2 years. And luckily, all the stars lined up together. Peter was a great mentor to me. The Brumos organization was the ones that were doing the preparation of the cars. And everything lined up. I won 2 championships, and then in '73, I moved over to the Can-Am, which was an enormous leap of not only driving against the world-class drivers from all over the world, also driving a car that had 1,200 horsepower. I was used to a car that had 300 horsepower with the 917 had huge downforce, so it was really a big adjustment. And in your 3rd year of racing, which is pretty young when you think about it, to get into a 917 when I was, 23 or 24 years old, was a huge leap. It was one of those things, when you look at that car, you just say, oh man, this is really cool looking, this is really something. But the first time I drove and I put my foot down on that throttle, it was like being shot out of a cannon. The acceleration rate, the braking rates was just awesome. And you knew that you had to have a tremendous amount of respect for this car. If you just let your enthusiasm and your adrenaline run wild without having a cap on it, you were going to make a big mistake. And when you look at that technology of how that car was built in that era, basically the tubing was the size of your finger, aluminum tubing. And if you ever hit anything solid at a high rate of speed, you were just going to be in a world of trouble. So, and Mark Donahue was one of the guys that really, really helped me. The biggest advice he gave me, take little steps, and then pretty soon you'll be up to pace. And that's what I did. You didn't want to fool around with a car that had 1,200 horsepower racing against the best drivers in the world. Every time I walk into this building, I'm kind of awestruck by the visual part of seeing these cars that I've driven. And when you look back, to 1971, 50 years ago, it just is like this amazing rush, because I can't remember what I had for breakfast this morning, but I can remember what happened 50 years ago. We are so lucky to be able to have all of this together in this beautiful building. All these cars have got the space they need, the electronics. You can walk up to any car, press a button, and get the history of the car. There's really no other facility that you're able to get so close to the cars where you can almost smell the heritage in these cars. A lot of people ask about the colors. So let me take a step back. Most people are familiar with the red, white, and blue stripes, but originally our cars in 71 and 72 were painted orange. Why orange? Well, that was Professor Porsche's favorite color. Somebody once then came and told Peter that orange cars do not photograph well in black and white. So we came up with the scheme, the paint scheme, and we were an American team, so the red, white, and blue scheme worked well, and it was a really cool stripe. That sweep was something that was very recognizable and very easy to lay out on a car, especially a Porsche. That color scheme is iconic. I mean, everybody knows it and recognizes it. When you think back, when I drove those cars in anger in a race and still have those cars in our family, that's really something that makes me feel good anyway. And I think when people come in and look at these cars, they see that relationship, and I think that's important for a lot of people to see that. Well, I think when people come into this building, they understand what Brumos is all about and why Brumos is such a strong name that is not only represented by the name Brumos, but also by the color scheme. They understand why Brumos is such a revered name, why Brumos is the standard bearer of excellence, why we won so many championships, why we were such a successful team. You're going to see an evolution of racing technologies. From Dan has one of the finest collections of Miller race cars in the world. Harry Miller was somebody that was a real innovator with both engine technology and car building. And when you look around here, you can see these cars, but you can see the enormous acceleration of development from these cars from the early 20s to our current cars. You can see all that technology come to the forefront, and what an old Miller, a 1923 Miller, looks like versus what a 2019 RSR looks like. I think it's really important for people to be able to see that and to see the technology and how these different things have developed into concepts that go on street cars. Well, I think when people come into this collection, obviously they've loved cars, and when they're able to see this variety of cars all in one location, I think they walk away and they say, I'm not crazy for loving cars. I'm not crazy for loving racing. Here, this is what it's all about in this building. And it's kind of a justification of their love affair with the automobile, their love affair with racing, their love affair with Porsche. We have a spectacular display of Porsche race cars from the beginnings, from a 550 all the way up to the latest, greatest GT car. So it's a justification of the love affair that people have with the automobile. And this is the perfect place to see that.